Hi, I'm Bai Macfarlane with Mary's Advocates, and Mary's Advocates upholds marriage, especially against no-fault divorce, from a Catholic perspective. And I have with me John Clark, who's the author of a book that's about to be released, but I already got to read it, Betrayed Without a Kiss. And John, could you tell us what is your subtitle, and how did you get into this work?
Well, the subtitle is Defending Marriage After Years of Failed Leadership in the Church. How to get into it? Well, essentially the start of this was, I can go even further back, but I'll start with this. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, a friend came to me and his marriage was going through some tough times, looked like a divorce might be on the horizon. And he came to me for some advice. And that's the point where I started really looking into, okay, what is the church teaching on marriage? I mean, I already knew that. Like, I went to Christendom, and I was lucky enough to take sacraments class with Dr. William Marshner, who is a friend of many people who, at least his writing is a friend to many people who are listening to this. So, so I knew doctrines, taken a lot of theology classes, certainly been writing about theology for a few decades, but I really wanted to go back and look at, okay, what is going on here? Because what he would mention to me was he would say things like, well, in the diocese he was in, the diocese mandated a civil divorce prior to having an annulment hearing.
Was this your friend or Dr. Marsher?
This is my friend. Yeah, this is my friend.
Okay.
Yeah. So he came to me and asked me. My friend was having trouble with his marriage. He said, he said that the diocese mandated civil divorce prior to even having an annulment hearing, like even going to before a marriage tribunal. And I thought, there's no way that's true. How could it be that could be? That's not, I said, you've got to be wrong. I'm going to investigate this. So I started investigating it. And then lo and behold, he was actually 100% correct. And then I discovered that all of the dioceses in America, that I'm aware of at least, do the same thing. So I started sort of doing a deep dive into basically asking, well, what in the world is going on here? And the more it's funny, I came up with this title, Betrayed Without a Kiss, I started writing it, and somebody said, boy, that's a pretty rough title. Like, are you sure you want to call it that? The more research I did, the more I thought, no, that's about right. The fact of the matter is that matrimony is not being treated as a sacrament. So basically, the answer to your question is, what got me started was try to help my friend, and I started assembling research, and I thought, I don't have a column here, I have a book. And what I really wanted to do,
I was struck by how many pages and pages you have in your bibliography. I'm like, do you have a doctorate or something where you've written books before?
So,
like, who are you?
Well, thanks for asking. So I've written about 500 columns over the years for the National Catholic Register, Seton Magazine, things like that. I don't have a doctorate, but I have written a lot about theology. Thanks for noticing the bibliography, by the way, because it's sort of funny, because one of the things that I think that people will say when they read this is, well, who is John Clark to be saying these things? And I'm saying, I'm just the guy in the pew. That's all I am. That's all I claim to be. But I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and like Aquinas and Pope St. John Paul II. So when somebody goes back and looks at my bibliography, at least they'll realize, look, he didn't just pull these ideas out of a Cheerios box. Like, this is, it's very well researched, and I like writing. I am a ghost writer, so I've written books for people, just not under my own name. So, but thanks for noticing. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, in the way you say you're just a guy in the pew, I'm just a gal in the pew. I've compiled on Mary's Advocates website, I'm daring to say hundreds of sources from historical church teachings and giants like the Cardinal Raymond Burke, who was in charge of the Signatura, or lots of commentaries on the Code of Canon Law. And nothing that I'm saying is me. It's not an original thought. It's just like, well, this is what they've been saying for decades and centuries, and something is going wrong now. Like you say, they require a divorce before a tribunal will even look at an annulment question. The Catechism says divorce is a grave offense against nature and immoral.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one of the few times in the Bible where God says, I hate Malachi, I hate divorce.
That's right.
So I was like, how in the world, or why? Like, there's like you couldn't even believe it when your friend said that.
No, and that's the thing. So the more I looked into it, I thought, what are we doing? And then when you start looking at numbers, and the thing is, like as a Catholic, if you're a practicing Catholic, and you're really not, look, I have a storybook marriage. I think that's fair to say. Like we just celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary. Um, Lisa and I, we have 9 children. And that's actually one of the things that actually I think confused people as to why I was writing this. Why you have, if you have a great marriage, why are you writing this? How does this apply to you? It applies to me because all the sacraments apply to me. If anointing of the sick were treated as anything less than a sacrament, I'd be writing about that. If baptism were being treated in a way that marriage is being treated right now, I'd be writing about that. I may be writing about those because lately, after going through 2020, we see that actually all 7 sacraments were treated as they should have been, right? We had hospitals, we had priests not going to hospitals, and people had anointing of the sick. That we had sick people that weren't getting anointed. I have a friend of mine overseas who waited about, I think it was 10 months to get her baby baptized, because after all, there was COVID.
Yeah. So who's in charge is what
Yeah.
I would
So
start wondering. Or how are these decisions being made?
yeah,
I wanted to
exactly.
ask you something about, I'm looking at the table of contents here. You
Hmm.
talk about the attack on marriage from outside the church, and that's something
Hmm.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on, but it was
Okay.
pornography, the radical women, the women's feminist movement, and like the
Hmm.
disrespect of fathers and men. Those are the three
Yes.
that you talk about. But then you start talking about, and this is where my readers are interested,
Hmm.
is the attack on marriage from inside the church.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the things you talk about is Vatican II. A lot of people are saying that in the past 1900 years, the church was kind of like living in the dark ages, some kind of animalistic, weird understanding of marriage. And now, because of Vatican II, we have a new, true understanding of marriage. Can
Hmm.
you explain what you found in what did you find? What was the root of that?
So, okay, so the challenge is when people say, well, Vatican II changed something. The problem that I've discovered, and this is not simply on the marriage question, the problem tends to be that um, people will say, like the progressives will say, oh, Vatican II changed all that. Like, why don't you have altar rails? Well, Vatican II changed all that. And my response would be, what document? Where does it say that? Where does it say you shouldn't have altar rails? Sadly, the same thing happens sort of from the other side, right? So sort of the very, very conservative sides. Well, Vatican II changed the teaching on marriage, and my challenge is the same. What document? That's not what happened. Vatican II did not change the teaching on marriage. By the way, the primary purpose of marriage is the procreation and education of children. That's infallible teaching. It's not changeable. So Vatican II, if you look at the sections where they're discussing marriage, there was a focus on, I think it was generally trying to focus on spousal love because it was directed to the people of the world. By the way, that's not a bad focus, but focus does not equal end, and Vatican II doesn't present it as an end. And that's the thing we have to remember. Vatican II did
And you
not
mean an
change
end in the
this.
philosophical sense of marriage has an end as part of what makes marriage marriage.
That's right. So right, that is right. And say in the Aristotelian sense, that's right. So that's the end. So we have to realize that what's happened here was not Vatican II changing something. To my reading, and I don't think there's any way around this, this was the imposition of the American procedural norms several years after the Second Vatican Council. So you went from 1969, where you had about 315 marriages, to 2 years. So the year
You said
following the
marriages, you meant annulments, right?
annulments. I'm sorry, yes,
Like 300
for
some?
the 350 annulments in 1969, give or take. Um, 1 year after the American procedural norms, the number of annulments was over 5,000. So, I worked on Wall Street and for 17 or 18 years, and I got to use to chart reading. So if I have a strength, maybe it's, chart reading, right? You simply look at a chart. And if somebody was saying, well, it's Vatican II change it, I would say, oh, okay, the document, Gaudium et Spes, this year, here's where it's at. No, it didn't. It started with the changes, and there were formal changes. It was fairly clear what was going on. So, in effect, that is the change. So Vatican II should not be blamed for this. It could have restated things better. For that matter, so could canon law have restated things more clearly.
Yeah, and let me cut in here. Hold that thought, please. To explain to the listener why the ends of marriage matter. Because if someone is incapable of entering a contract, then a marriage would be an invalid marriage. Like, for a ridiculous example, if I was hypnotized, if that was possible, and I said the marriage promises while I was hypnotized, that is an invalid contract. I am not held to uphold those obligations, or my husband's not, the groom doesn't have any right to that, because I was actually incapable. So going back long before the 1983 code, there is such a thing as someone who is so mentally incapacitated that they were incapable of consenting to marriage. But we need to understand, well, what do they need to consent to know whether they're able to consent to marriage? So this business you're talking about, the thing that's very important is the definition of marriage. And in 1983, they reworked. They didn't invent a new ground out of thin air. They just took kind of like the principles they were already using, and they codified them. So there's we call it amongst the defenders of marriage, it's the loose cannon. 1095-2 is the loose cannon. And it's people are incapable of consenting to marriage who have a grave lack of discretion of judgment about the essential rights and obligations of marriage. So then you need to break that apart and unpack, well, what are the essential rights and obligations of marriage? And to know what the essential rights and obligations are, you need to know, well, what makes marriage marriage? What is the essence of marriage? And the primary purpose of marriage, which is doctrine, can't be changed, procreation and education of children, and then subordinate to that is this idea of mutual help or remedy for concupiscence, which is not having to do with someone's sex drive only. That is not remedy for concupiscence. Remedy for concupiscence is much bigger than that. It's kind of like growing in virtue and being less inclined to fall into your sinful patterns that are driven by one's concupiscence. So
that's a great point, by the way.
Given all that, what the American procedural norms and the writers in canon law in America were talking about during this time, which I want to say was like 71 to 83, around there, because around that time.
The code was in work. It was going for a long time, but
But when the American procedural norms were in play, the canonists in the United States, how they were allowed to give judgments changed. It used to be that one tribunal with 3 members would look at the facts of a case and judge whether or not the marriage was invalid. It wouldn't go into effect until a second tribunal with 3 judges looked at it, reviewed how they decided. Well, the American procedural norms said that, the second review, you can skip that if someone in authority thinks it's merely superfluous. So what I've heard Cardinal Burke say is what happened during that era, almost every single one was judged by just one tribunal. And they didn't need 3 judges anymore. You found that in your book. So this was what was going on in the United States. So one judge is reading this stuff written by the canonist in his scholarly canon law journals, and he's reading Vatican II changed marriage. Now the essential properties of marriage include communion of life and love, partnership, and undefined everything under the sun. And that's what was going on when those numbers were going up.
Well, that's right. And I think that Vatican II, what it's essentially doing is saying marriage should be this. It should. That's true. I mean, it should be. People should love each other. They should help each other, and all of that. Those things should be in place. We should all have a storybook marriage. But that's not a matter of validity.
Well, Catholicism should look like this. A Catholic should look like this. If you don't look like that, maybe your baptism was invalid.
Well, this is the point we're getting at. So there seems to be almost an intent. Well, I don't say almost. I think for some, I think we could say reasonably, there's an intentional handoff of the things, the rights properly reserved to the church to the state. I think that's what's happened. And the thing about it is where we are right now is, and by the way, that was a brilliant summary you just gave of the American procedural norms. That was great. It's so important people know that, because you got to realize where this comes from. But this sort of ripples out to the other sacraments if you really think about this. Because I think what we're about to have, and you may have already seen some of this, was the holy orders valid? Was my first confession valid? If you either do we want to have a scenario where people are constantly worried that the sacraments are not valid? Do we want that? And do we want to stand before tribunals of people who, let's be honest, I'm just going to say it, are not well trained theologically? Is that fair to say? That are trying to determine, I mean, you have to be familiar with the sacramentality of matrimony to be deciding cases. I think that's fair to say.
Well, are you talking about the ones who work in the tribunals?
Yes.
See, the law requires the judicial vicar to have as a degree in canon law. I recall it's a doctorate, but I could be wrong. It might be just a JCL, like a master's. But all the other people who work for the tribunal, it's like if someone I remember learning about Chicago, for example. If someone in Chicago was divorced and they participate in some little program that has a paperback book that's yay thick for divorce recovery, the last chapter is about annulments. The diocese had like 80 field advocates who know nothing other than what they were taught in their 3-week session where they went 2 hours a week, 3 times in a row. I don't exactly know what the training was, but part of what I do with Mary's Advocates is I show people how to uphold their procedural rights, because the canon law says this, this, and this should be happening. And if a defendant is not experiencing that, I show them how to ask for it and cite the law. So very often I find that little old me, who's just looked up a bunch of stuff and thrown it on a website, knows how the canon laws are supposed to work, and the people who work in the tribunals don't. And I was like, it's written right there. Like,
yeah, you would think you would need a pretty solid knowledge of the Code of Canon Law and what that means. But again, yeah, it's a mess. And it's funny. When I was growing up, I grew up in Ohio, right? Not far from you. I used to spend my summers in Cleveland Heights, so I grew up in Ohio. But I wanted to be a shortstop for the Cincinnati Reds. That was kind of like my goal in life. Didn't work out because I can't hit, can't throw, can't field, that sort of stuff. Now you know what I want to be? I want to be a defender of the bond. That's my goal. That's like my dream. I want to be a defender of the bond. Because I got to tell you, we both know of dioceses, and I've used a lot of your research, so I really want to thank you for that. And you've helped me with different sections of the book, so I really appreciate that. So you know very well that there are dioceses that you go through, you wanted to get an annulment, you're good, 100%. Literally, 100%, yes.
Yeah, one of the resources that I share is the statistics that are published by the Canon Law Society of America, which is not, it's its own entity. Whoever canon lawyers want to join it are allowed to join it. For a long time, they had their mailing address at the campus of Catholic University of America, which gave the impression that they were part of Catholic University of America, which is a place where you can get a canon law degree approved by Rome. But the Canon Law Society is actually a totally independent entity. But anyhow, they have annual meetings, and they would collect statistics from whichever diocese wanted to share them. So maybe 2/3, half the diocese, I'm not exactly sure. And they published this through 2016, and about 1/3 of the diocese give annulments to 100% of the cases that they judge. And sometimes I hear pushbacks like, oh, well, just because they grant annulments to 100 cases they judge, you don't know how many petitions somebody submitted, and they saw that the petition was so weak that they never even brought the case to do a judgment. But the last time the society published it, there was a column showing that number. And there were dioceses that accepted 100% of the petitions and gave annulments to 100% of the petitioners. It's like...
Yeah, it's hard to look past that and say, so that's what I mean. Like, I do wonder how one can become a defender of the bond, because what are the requirements and what is it you have to do? I mean, if your job is to defend the bond, what is it that you're doing in dioceses that are 100%?
Well, here's where it gets very messy. And, God willing, some authoritative clarity will come from higher up to some of the, you and I are we're digging our heels in the sand saying that the essential ends of marriage are procreation, education of children, partnership, communion of life and love. They're not. So you could have a perfectly valid marriage. A wife could be a real nasty person that's really difficult to live with. Heck, she could even cheat on her husband. She could be an alcoholic. She could go to jail. But that has nothing to do with whether or not the marriage is valid.
Well, this is why I spent an entire chapter on, most of an entire chapter on King Henry VIII. Well, if you know, being a philanderer would annul a marriage somehow, well, Catherine of Aragon would have had a really good case. She realized that she realized it was a marriage. By the way, so did John Fisher, so did Thomas More. In other words, two of those three are canonized, and I'm hoping that Catherine of Aragon is canonized. I actually am working on something now. I'm trying to start a petition to get Catherine of Aragon canonized. But the point is that why were they canonized? If you and I are wrong on this issue, why was John Fisher canonized? What was logic? So you know who did actually agree that their marriage should be invalid was every other bishop who wasn't Catholic. Yes, exactly. Who renounced the Catholic faith, part and parcel to renouncing their marriage. King Henry VIII set it up in such a way that you would sign a declaration that you essentially renounced Rome and affirmed his marriage to Anne Boleyn. That's not an accident. I mean, look what happened. So the church was willing to lose England for the faith, in effect, right? To affirm one marriage. Why we're not speaking about that all the time, and why we're not hearing that sermon about how this all happened, let's say once a year, I don't know why. But we ought to talk about this. So,
I love that part of your book. I kind of got the same feeling reading that in that part of your book where you're going through the historical characters that I get on the Easter Vigil when they're reading all the readings, and it's just great story after great story after great story. It's just very, very inspiring. And I was like, I want to clap for these people. Like, ooh, good for you, the hero.
Well, thank you.
You know, even if you die for it. And I think you're a great storyteller. I mean, I never would have guessed that this topic would have been like an interesting read. But maybe I'm biased because it's my topic. But I don't know. But now, if someone's having marriage trouble, and I have heard from priests, so, you know, God bless them. We all know that so many things are crazy right now.
Sure.
The first time a priest will meet with one or a husband or a wife or both is when they're in a crisis, bad crisis. But rather than the priest, you know, giving them your chapter or something like that, some encouragement of, you know, you can make it through this, out comes the annulment, and then the annulment paperwork. In your book, you talk about this, that they pull out the color flyer, the color brochure about annulments, and you give an example of one of the definitions of the loose canon 1095-2, which is so psychobabble, undefined gobbledygook. I mean, nobody would know whether they have a valid marriage reading that. Or you talk about the Beach Boys. It's like, yeah. Anyways, this is a real situation. A guy I know, terrible marriage crisis. His wife's filing for divorce. When someone is a defendant in a divorce, like men lose weight, people can't concentrate at work, they're crying all the time, they can't sleep, you're actually having all of your stability ripped out from under you, because like if a spouse dies, there's insurance, you have friends that, you know, bring over meals, but this is the government takes over your property and your children, and if husband and wife don't agree on how to split their kids, which a divorce defendant who didn't do anything wrong to justify separation, they're never going to agree to split their kids. Like, wait a minute, our kids are home with me. You should come home. But I'm digressing. This guy in a Midwestern diocese was in this situation. He went to the parish where he had his marriage prep to ask this priest for help. The priest literally went back, pulled out his pre-cana, like when a priest does an investigation to, like you go through, it's called a pre-cana if a priest does it. He's supposed to keep notes on a couple. He pulls out those notes, and he gives the husband information about applying for annulment, and, you know, I'll be able to help you after you get your divorce, because this is our healing. It's like, I think these priests were taught that the annulment is the healing the church offers when a divorce when people experience divorce. So they're just doing what they're taught. And here you come and say it's an annulment culture?
Well, it's sort of funny. It's been an interesting year for me. So I've been criticized for cautioning people against watching movies about Satanism, because those are all popular. Year 2023, that looks like every weekend there's another movie about an exorcism, and I'm like, this is probably not edifying for your soul. So I've been criticized for not defending the sort of the books about the movies about the devil, and I have been criticized for questioning annulments. And I think, I'm not the first to question annulments. You know who's the first to question? It was the Roman Rota. So in other words, for people listening may not know this, so the Roman Rota is essentially the Supreme Court of the Catholic Church. The Roman Rota overturns plenty. The numbers are hard to come by. Let's just get that out of the way. The numbers are hard to come by. But the Roman Rota has overturned a lot of annulments that are found in America. So my question is, if the marriage tribunals are always right, why are they overturning? Why are they overturning those things? What? I mean, some of the marriage tribunals have gone rogue. How can we conclude anything other than that? But yet you can't question it. You can question marriage. You can question that. You're good. Yeah, maybe my marriage is yeah, you're good. You can question marriage. Sure, that's fine. You better not question annulments. I don't understand. And by the way, when I say annulment culture, one of the things that I mention in my book is, and after you've read the book, you know this, and anybody who's actually read the book would know, I am not against annulments per se, far from it. Sometimes the church should have findings of nullity for the sake of justice. Clearly that I agree with that. But when you go from 350 of something to 70,000 of that thing, why can't I use the term annulment culture? What numbers would we have to see before I can use the term annulment culture without being criticized? Would it be every marriage? What if every marriage were found null? Would it be an annulment culture then? What number would we have to pass to be able to use that term? I think we're already there.
Well,
I think we were there years ago.
And also, the law clearly states all marriages must be presumed valid until proven and judged otherwise. So and then there's something that I found, like you had a friend going through a situation that got you digging because you're like, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. And
right.
I got into my work because of being a divorce defendant. And what I've heard, even from like someone who works in a diocesan office, is, well, it's not divorce that's the problem. The church doesn't mind the divorce. It's only remarriage after an annulment. And I'm like, okay, the government takes over children and property. People have governments order them to lose tens of thousands of dollars of their assets for children's guardian ad litems and children's attorneys. And then if you're a defendant and you can't, you don't know how to do it yourself and you hire a lawyer, like, this is what divorce is. Let's say a woman's husband did commit adultery and he's out philandering. She has a morally legitimate reason to be separated. But because of no-fault divorce, she will be treated exactly the same as the husband regarding the property split and the children's visitation. So, this is what no-fault divorce is in the United States. So when I was seeing that, and then this woman who works in the diocesan offices is telling me, well, we don't have any problem with that. The only issue is divorce in and of itself is just a civil thing. It just rang wrong. That doesn't make sense. And when I started digging into it, I found out that this is not what's supposed to be happening. Nobody with a Catholic marriage, and this is part of what I get beat up about because I dig my heels in the sand, because I found too many canon law commentaries from all over the world and decrees from the judgments from the Roman Rota that talk about this. No one is supposed to be going to the civil forum for divorce and separation without first having gone through an ecclesiastical canon law process about separation of spouses. So an independent private person is not allowed to go to the civil court on her own authority. Maybe she needs to run home to her mom's with her kids when her husband's drunk and beating her up. That's different than having the government take over your family. And this whole section of the doctrine and canon law that says the church has competence over deciding obligations of married people, that whole section is just thrown in the garbage. And they say you have to get your divorce first before we'll even look at an annulment.
I think that, I mean, if people go back to the Council of Trent, I mean, it sort of goes back farther than this in the church, but the Council of Trent allows for separation. And sure, that's not, divorce is not the same as, mere separation. I mean, I think those are two separate things, as you're pointing out. I think one of the things
what I'm pointing out is what principles are used to decide the parties' obligations.
Oh, right.
So if we use canon law or morality or natural law to decide obligations of a mom and dad when one of them has a legitimate reason to be separated, you'll have a certain outcome. And justice would have to determine how that would go. And yes, someone needs to decide. But in no-fault divorce, what they do is totally different. And if someone has a morally legitimate reason to be separated and they might need to have a civil enforceable order, civil divorce for Catholics is just a separation that's enforceable in the civil forum. It's like we don't really have a Catholic divorce exactly.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying. Right. So that's a good distinction. Well, part of the thing is, as I say, there's sort of this gray area in a way that, or what seems to be a gray area in a way, and here's why. So once you start giving powers to the state regarding marriage, in other words, my one of my main focuses with this book is that we have to eliminate the divorce mandate. That we have to eliminate that is so key to this whole thing. So you make an excellent distinction. That's definitely more to think about. So this is a really good, interesting topic. For me, I want to concentrate on the simply elimination of the divorce mandate. And what is going to happen is, and again, there are people listening to this and thinking, well, this doesn't really apply to me. Well, what if before a priest will baptize a baby, you have to bring a birth certificate? By the way, I heard of this happening. I can't verify it, but I heard of this happening, that there was a priest that wouldn't baptize the baby unless he had a birth certificate. Why? Was he thinking it wasn't actually a baby? I'm not trying to be funny. Like, I don't understand. So the point is that why are we waiting for we're granting the church power, and one of the things I talk about in the book is, as you know, is that governments seem to have a lot of interest over the sacraments. You would think they wouldn't. They actually kind of do. So, again, we saw this in 2020, and again, why was the church? The church should have said, look, people need anointing of the sick. If it is as bad as this, and obviously, some people were very sick in 2020. People died in 2020. People died through COVID. Why we're getting anointed sick? To me, this is only the beginning. What I'm saying is this is the beginning of a problem. This is going to get worse. We need to stand up for the sacraments. I'm making a much more comprehensive view of what's going on.
If they were willing to get rid of the divorce mandate, how do you see it would play out? Okay, that's a great challenge, but what instead?
Well, what would happen instead would be you would try to reconcile the couple.
Got it.
Part of the problem is, I think, that what you have now is that you have, I think that the paperwork of civil divorce is basically used as somebody to take to the marriage tribunal to sort of does the heavy lifting for them. In other words, well, after all, if these two had any chance of reconciling, they wouldn't have had this gone to get a civil divorce in the first place. However, here's the problem. Human decency, canon law, these are the sort of things that would say, look, let's try to help the couple heal. Again, you said earlier, the first, and I've said this many times, that when couples sit down with a priest for the first time, many times it's to tell them they are divorced or they're having problems. And so they pull out the annulment brochures. Let's start checking boxes. That's pretty deflating, right? I mean, why are you not trying to help me? Why are you not trying to help the children? I don't get it. And, we're not supposed to ask these questions, right?
The other thing, if the priest is saying, or, if they're kind of reneging the church's proper competence over these determinations of obligations, if the church is reneging this proper competence to the state, and then they're concluding like you're saying, well, our tribunal, our annulment law says that we have to affirm, we have to confirm that reconciliation is impossible. So now that we have this civil divorce decree, we can put a check mark next to that thing that we've confirmed that reconciliation is impossible. What's totally being overlooked is that like 2/3 of divorces are forced on a defendant against his or her will. And they actually, they either sign papers under coercion. It's so much coercion, because if you don't want a divorce and you're innocent of anything grave justifying separation, and your spouse wants to abandon marriage and decides they're out, they'll go file for a civil divorce. Your only option is hire very expensive lawyers, like you said, tens or hundreds, $100,000 easily. If there's children, easily $100,000 between the lawyers.
Sure.
You hire expensive lawyers, and then you have a battle where everybody gives testimony and you bring in witnesses to a judge, and then the judge decides how to split the children. Okay, that's an option. But the judge is splitting the children with no-fault principles, so they don't care that you did nothing wrong to justify separation. So you're coerced to lose tens of thousands of dollars of family assets to have this battle about children or battle about property, where the judge is just going to decide based on no fault anyway. That's one option. The other option is to sign an agreement about how to split children property. Well, you don't really agree to split your children property at all. So in Mary's Advocates, I have seen parties go both ways. I've seen them go where they're like, look, I'm not going to, they sign the agreement where some kind of settlement with children and property. And then the way it's described is both parties agreed to the divorce. They wanted divorce, plural. They wanted divorce. Like, oh, if they could reconcile, they wouldn't have gone divorce. Well, it's like, wait a minute. One person was kicking and screaming and crying, signing a coerced agreement, and the other person is technically a marital abandoner. And where's the church instructing people? And more than just this harsh, ruler on the hands instructing people, where is the church giving hope? It's like, look, you know what? You're mad at your wife because of blah. You're ticked off about this. You're scared about that. All these different reasons. Like, I think I've seen Michael McManus, who's this guy who has a marriage helpers movement. I think it was him that attributed this quote. He's like, 90% of the problems are the same problems that 90% of the people have. It's like, you're not unique. Welcome to humanity. You can get through this. But instead, here's your annulment brochure. Tell us your experience of community and partnership. 1095, loose cannon. Off you go.
Well, again, yes, to your point, once you put unilateral divorce into the mix, this entire idea, well, they can't get along, is completely absurd. It's an absurdity, right? And that's the problem, is that, are they even aware, when they made this plan, were they even aware that there is unilateral divorce? I'm not trying to be funny, but I'm like, well, what? How? It's the flimsiest of contracts in that respect, right?
Well,
I mean, if I rented a house from you, right? Let's say a rental contract was drawn up, the same as like divorce, right? I'd be like, I don't want to rent anymore. It's October 22nd. I'm going to leave. I'm done. I know you signed a 2-year lease, so I don't like it. Why not? I don't even need to give you a reason. I don't need to give you a reason. I won't give you a reason. I'm out. And then I take that to somebody like, well, there's no way these two are going to get along. There's no way we can reckon. It doesn't work at any level of law. And to sort of link this to the determination of the validity of a sacrament,
to going through that first. And the other thing is, I mean, yes, work on reconciling it when in some future, hopefully you and I will still be alive when this happens, when they drop the divorce mandate and they start using reconciliation and pastoral care first. If there is an actual reason for an annulment, well, then let the obligations towards their parties and their children be decided according to justice. And canon law does say that when an annulment decree is issued or sentence, it's supposed to include instructing the parties of their obligations towards each other and their children, moral and civil. So if that woman never wanted kids, she lied to the priest. One of her bridesmaids knew it. She never wanted kids. She just wanted a big party. Her mom was pressuring her she should get married because she's cohabiting with her boyfriend, whatever. And then 2 years down the road, this husband is getting more and more sad because he wants kids, and he's like, and she's like, yeah. So they get divorced. That husband has a actual reason for an annulment, because the wife simulated an essential property of marriage, which was openness to children. She was deceptive. So in that situation, why should no fault be the basis for a property split? Like, why does that man owe her spousal support for X number of years? Why does the default of 50-50 property split happen? Wait a minute, she lied to him. She frauded him.
That's
so their obligations should be made based on their situation.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Right. Okay, that's a good point.
You know, I mean, okay, or these stupid. I mean, I'm frustrated about the loose cannons, because those are the ones that people who correspond with me usually are dealing with.
Sure.
And if the annulment petitioner was that messed up at the time of marriage that they couldn't, with their intellect and will, understand and choose permanence to children, no adultery. I'm sorry, openness to children, no adultery, and permanence. If they were that messed up in the head, well, then maybe they should become a ward of the state, because that's pretty badly messed up if you can't even understand that. So why does the divorce defendant have to pay this gal spousal support? She was never a spouse in the first place. Maybe she should pay damages to him. It's like those kinds of ideas,
right?
Versus no fault. And then
I was going to say, you're much more an expert on the civil divorce side of this. I didn't really go over that in my book, but I will say that, look, these things have to be this should all be reviewed. I mean, the system isn't work. You know, I point out, look, the sacrament of matrimony isn't broken. Sacraments don't break. What's broken then? The system is broken. So we need to try to figure out how we can fix it. I do find it troubling that you and I aren't supposed to even ask questions. Look, we're faithful Catholics. I will say this, because I really want to emphasize this. Especially when you look at the subtitle of my book. I just want to make clear, I love priests. I love the priesthood. I do not like even questioning prelates publicly. I don't like doing it. Some people seem to enjoy it. I don't. I don't like it. Believe me, as a Catholic apologist, there are some days I wish I'd just been a sports reporter. I don't. I'm serious. Like, I can't. It's hard for me to do this, and yet, because you're going to take criticism for it, and you don't want to criticize priests. You don't want to even question priests and bishops. I don't enjoy it at all. I specifically do not like doing it. But the problem is, we're talking about the sacraments, and there is so much involved that the laity, and again, just the guy in the pew like me, needs to start asking questions about this, and we're not allowed to ask. Why aren't we allowed to ask? Can you clarify for me? Can we have a conversation?
You make a connection in here that I really thought was on target. Like, wow, that Eucharist and marriage are tied together, like amongst the faithful. If the faithful don't believe in marriage, they don't believe in Eucharist often, and they both fall and rise together. And you were talking about could you talk about that? Like, what makes Eucharist, what really happens at consecration, and how that's parallel to what really happens at consent?
So I would probably, in the foreword, by the way, to my way of thinking, which I did not write, that is the best part of the book. And she actually makes this point very, very well. So I would say read the foreword for a great explanation of what you just asked. My 2-word answer would be, words matter. This is my body matters. I do matters. Words matter. Once we think they don't matter, well, if we don't think I do matters, does this is my body really matter? If you start looking at the decline in the belief in the real presence, which you can draw again, we're back to the charts and graphs, right? Chart that, and then chart it with the annulment uptick. It's probably pretty close. I mean, this is what it comes down to. We either are. I want to see some statistics on how many people are receiving anointing of the sick. We know the confession is not employed much these days, right? I don't seem to have any problem getting it. I mean, so it's. People have stopped going to confession. I don't know if they're baptizing the babies. I think they do, but more of a cultural thing in some respects, right? Are people getting confirmed? Is it taken seriously? I had a priest tell me that confirmation is generally considered graduating from Catholicism.
Oh, PSR or whatever.
What's that?
Graduating from PSR, they call it around here. PSR is Parish School of Religion for the kids that aren't in the Catholic school.
Right. So this is he said this is to look at confirmation as like you graduated from the faith. Then they stop going to mass. The seven sacraments are symbiotic, and as I often tell people, look, when I go to confession, I feel closer to Lisa. When we walk up to receive communion together, we feel closer to each other. I doubt that's just us. So what it comes down to is that we are meant to live sacramental lives. And so all of the sacraments are symbiotic, but ultimately words matter, and we have to make that case. But if we're standing ready to say, well, okay, let's see what boxes we can check. Well, was the consecration this morning valid? Well, let's see what boxes we can check. How did we get here? How did we get here? How did we get from the Pope willing to lose a nation to save a marriage to here? How did we get here?
One of the things that I suspect, and I've kind of heard it secondhand, is that they want to keep people in the church. So they're someone's already divorced, they're already in a second so-called marriage, and they want to be in the church. So the way to get that person to be in the church is to give them their annulment, and then they can regularize their marriage. Okay, that's if it's actually a bogus annulment. I mean, we all experience the natural consequences of this. Like the children experience the natural consequences. If there really are bogus annulments being given, like you said, the data we do have about the Roman Rota Appellate Tribunal overturning U.S. decisions, if they're overturning U.S. decisions, that means bogus annulments are being given out. So when a bogus annulment is given out, it doesn't make the new marriage actually a sacramental valid marriage anyway. The children are going back. Everyone's experiencing the natural consequences of the breakup of the intact family, where one person is now with a new partner. You can't erase that by giving a bogus annulment, and maybe the 100%. People stay in the church. But
100%. And I'll tell you something else. There is just to solidify that idea. So in one of the annulment brochures, I did a lot, as you mentioned earlier, I did a lot of research, and I looked at a lot of the different brochures that are out there. There's these, the glossy brochures on the back of the church. You pick one up. That's incredibly imprudent and unwise, but that's fine. One of them actually makes a statement that I think is a little bit shocking. Well, they're a little bit shocking in a lot of ways, but trying to follow their logic, right? One of them is, this was it. You have to make sure that you are members of a church in this diocese because, and I believe they even used the term, we don't want people doing annulment shopping. And I thought, so if the annulments are always right, if the marriage tribunals always get it right, what advantage would one gain by, quote, annulment shopping? Now, you and I both know that people come to America for annulment shopping, right? In my book, I say, look, when the dollar is weak, shoppers come to America to buy things. When the church in America is weak, they come to America for annulments. We know that's, we strongly suspect that is what's happening. When you simply look at the numbers and, America, the American tribunals giving out more annulments than sort of like the rest of the world. We've all seen these statistics. They're hard to get exactly, but you can feel pretty confident going with that as a philosophical position, right? So they're using the term annulments. In other words, they know what's going on. They think, well, we don't want people annulment shopping. I don't either. What I do want you to do, but you understand what I'm saying? Like, if they're always right, why? What do you care if I'm? What difference does it make? What diocese I'm going to? It shouldn't matter to you in the least. And it's just, and you think, boy, by your own logic, it's sort of like. Anyway, you get the idea. It's pretty messy.
That does tell something. There was something else I wanted to ask you about. You have a section near the end about marriage prep, and you were describing your own upbringing, like, hey, when you were in a high chair, marriage prep started, and within the last year, there was some document that came out from the Holy See that was suggesting long marriage preps, like 15 months. I think that's the number. I was really relieved to have you point out that, look, because people make this parallel between the two sacraments that are vocations, marriage and priesthood.
Sure.
And then we say, well, look at all the training that priests do for them to get their vocation sacrament. So we need to up the training that couples get. And it's like they overlook the fact, wait, this one's supernatural. Priesthood is supernatural. The natural vocation. Am I using the right terminology, would you say?
Well, I would say this. There was a natural law right to marry. But I think, I'm glad you liked that section. I wanted to address it. There were some areas that I wish I could address further. A friend of mine has gone through this book, and he said, John, each of these chapters could be its own book. So maybe one day I'll develop this. But the thing about it is when you're talking about a 12-month, 15-month, 18-month thing, and everybody, by the way, now it's just one upsmanship, right? So the bishop that wants to even say, no, it's 2 years, and he's like the hero because he want to make it 10 years, want to make it. So my thing is, look, once you don't follow the primary purpose of marriage, which, as we know, is the procreation and education of children, once you sort of don't follow that, once you stop subscribing to that, why not make it 5 years? But once you think that, okay, there's only a certain amount of time in which women can conceive. I'm not really giving anything away here. I mean, this is sort of the way that, God structured the body. I think that's the problem. Is that, look, you have two people in love. They want to marry each other. Well, no, but you got to do a 15-month class. First of all, I'm not sure that the people that are going to be teaching that class know anything more about marriage than most of the people that are going to be in the class. Right? Am I going to learn a lot? If I had to, so if I were getting married today, like, okay, you got to take a 15-month risk. I'll be like, I'm going to hold my book up here. Like, I just wrote this. I feel like I've got some knowledge of what we're talking about. Like, I kind of get it, right? They might say, well, you don't have much dating experience, so you shouldn't be getting married anyway, because that's obviously one of the things that people look at for like the canon 1095, right? We haven't dated many women. Of course, anyway, I don't want to get into all that, but the 14, 16 month thing, I think it's a horrible idea. By the way, it's not that hard to know enough to get married. This is the thing, like, boy, they really have to understand fidelity. How many weeks do we spend on what it means to not cheat? How many weeks do we need? Honestly, I just assume give, and I think I read or pointed this out. Just give them Casti Connubii to read. Take about a month. Have it go be 4 or 5 weekends. Have the priest go over it. Have the priest hear a general confession for the spouses. Bless their homes after they're married. 18 months. I don't know. In other words, we got to wait 18 months and do what? It's sort of like, it's not about time. It's about content.
Yeah, you made an excellent point when you said, I'm paraphrasing, once they started changing the essential purpose of marriage, then what's supposed to be happening in pre-Cana or the marriage investigation just opened to a whole new gamut. Because if you're talking about, well, do they have good communication skills? Do they know how to have a productive argument? Can they maintain their temper? Do they not go to sleep angry? Whatever, can they do their finances? Do they agree on their finances? All those kinds of things. When, like, even people who have no faith at all, well, many who aren't even Catholic, aren't Christian, if they're in a sexual relationship with somebody, they don't want that somebody cheating on them. It's like in your nature. Sure. You don't want that. That's kind of a norm. Or if you're a half normal parent, you don't want another, like for me, I don't want another woman replacing me as my kid's mom or as my stepmom. Like, I don't want that. I'm their mom. Like,
right.
You don't need a long class to teach that.
No, you could listen to 4 or 5 Taylor Swift songs to get the point there, right? I mean, yeah, breakups, people don't like cheating, that's bad. No, really, I mean, I don't want to make light of it because it's very serious, but at the same time, you wonder how to respond to something and not sound sarcastic. You want 16 months. Okay, so from the pulpit, they've never heard in, let's say, 20 years worth of sermons on Sunday, the priest has never once mentioned the primary purpose of marriage, never talked about marriage. They think Cassie Kenobi might be like a Tom Clancy thriller. Like, again, we're not teaching the faith for 20 years. And then when they say we want to get married, no, you got to wait 16 months. Why? Here's my idea. Now, this is maybe, again, I have to try very hard not to be sarcastic. I apologize. But how about this idea? How about we teach the faith? How about we teach about the seven sacraments? How about we do that? I do wonder, I mean, we homeschool our children, but I think we do a pretty good job, but people are supposed to be taking CCD. Is there a Catholic fifth grader that doesn't know there are seven sacraments? If there is, we're teaching it wrong. If they don't know that, in other words, the priest ought to be teaching the faith. Sunday sermons should equal pre-Cana. I mean, Sunday sermons should equal pre-Cana. And why they don't, that's not my fault, right? So it's not the fault of the couple that is going. I mean, I went to, at Christendom College. There were so many friends I knew, met each other there, got married, have lived, beautiful, beautiful lives as husband and wife. I just think it'd be funny, like if they're about to Lisa and I were married a few months after we graduated. If we had the present system or the system they're trying to float right now, the 16-month thing, they're like, no, you got to go 16 months. I'm like, really? Do you know how much theology I had to take to graduate? I mean, I could teach a class, right? And that's not meant to be cocky. I'm just saying, look, I just don't understand. I just want us to take the sacrament seriously again, and I think that a 16-month thing is an unserious suggestion.
There's something else you just said that reminded me of a section in your book when, you just say, look, we just want to be taught the faith. You've got a section in here where you talk about admonishing, correcting, restraining when people are renegades, whether it be an individual or even a teacher. Mm-hmm. That we're not seeing that. I'm having trouble putting into words how you were putting it in the book.
Well, I think that, so I think what you're mentioning is it's a failure to police heresy and heretics.
Yep.
So I mentioned...
How dare you, heresy, heretics?
I know.
So how do you not be a Pharisee and do that in all seriousness?
Well, I'll give you. I provide an example in the book. So you had Father Charles Curran, who was teaching a Catholic U, which was run by the bishops on the board, right? There are the board is bishops of America. So they let Father Charles Curran there for over 20 years after he came out against Humanae Vitae. 20 years after. So he was there for 20 years teaching theoretically the faith. Right? He was teaching doctrine or dogma or whatever it was he wanted to call it for 20 years. He was also writing, by the way, for the Canon Law Society of America's magazine. That's interesting. After Humanae Vitae, after his dissent of Humanae Vitae. So you've got, and by the way, I believe, I have a quote in the book, I think the Washington Post referred to Father Curran as, now Father Charles Curran is not a name that people would know, maybe people under 35 would know. But I'm 52. We know very well who Father Charles Curran was. I believe he was on TV a lot. I think he was on Nightline a few times or something. Washington Post, when Father Curran was finally censured, was about 20 years after Humanae Vitae. It was 21 years, something, 21 years. I can't remember exactly the number of years. It was a full 20 years. It was a generation of him teaching Catholics. The Washington Post said that he is the most well-known prelate in America. It's probably true. Why was that? But again, someone failed to police heresy. It just took the church a really long time. And what do you say about that? You lost a generation of Catholics.
And that's from a teacher with the divorced and in so-called second marriages. All these people are in... Many people are in that situation, and rather than go the I mean, I'm not a priest. I don't have people talking to me, so I can just imagine. I'm from the perspective of the husband who was abandoned by his wife. He's
Mm-hmm.
adamant, I did nothing grave enough to justify separation of spouses. She just, she started working part-time. She started going to the clubs. She started working out. All these guys at the club were expressing interest in her, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So now
Mm-hmm.
this lady dumps the husband, forces him through a no-fault divorce, and she appears to be caring about being a Catholic in public. And she's with a new guy now, and there's nobody correcting her in any visible way. You give an example of this. You name, can't remember the names of the people, but you name, there's this husband and wife and a 17-year-old daughter, maybe 13.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
husband dumps the wife, goes hangs out with some new lady, and
Mm-hmm.
then what is the daughter supposed to think when the husband's with this new lady going to communion, like they're all nice, we're all in the family together?
Right.
She's either going to think divorce is fine and marriage is a sick joke that just hurt my feelings and I should
Mm-hmm.
adjust to it. So
Yeah.
that, or she thinks Eucharist means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or both.
And so, I'm from the perspective of that daughter or the mom who's left with the daughter just besides herself. It's like, oh my gosh, I have to be in church and there's my husband with another woman acting like they're all partnery and the church is just being silent. What happened
Mm-hmm.
to Matthew 18? When your brother sins against you, you approach them privately and then you bring them to the church. And if they don't listen to the church, after you bring witnesses, then they should be treated like a tax collector and a Gentile. That's not nasty. That's charity. That's love. That's having a flourishing church.
Well, that's right. I think it comes down to, again, we keep coming. These questions all sort of have the same answer in a way, right? Because the sacraments are sacraments, right? I mean, that's essentially the answer. But I think the idea that, well, we got to get people back to communion. We do want to get people back to communion, but there's a way to do that. If I fall into and by the way, you and I are not judging the hearts of them. We don't know. I don't know what their hearts are. I don't know that. God knows their hearts. I certainly do not. But it does give scandal in any case. It does give scandal. It gives scandal to the 17-year-old in the story. I think I'm trying to remember myself now, but it's a scandal. What is that? What does that mean? How is this happening? How is he going to communion? Is marriage not a sacrament? Is the Eucharist not a sacrament? What just happened?
Right. Is indissolubility just some idea that doesn't really matter?
It's extraordinarily confusing, at least. And I spend some time in the book explaining the sin of scandal. We should reiterate, it's a real basic teaching, and this is something that should be talked about too. If I'm in the state of mortal sin, I cannot go to communion. That's me, John Clark. If I'm in the state of mortal sin, I can't go to communion. It's true for every Catholic. You can't go. That's not. Now, if the priest says, I can't give you communion if you're in the state of mortal sin, does he hate me? No. He loves me. He also loves God. He loves the Eucharist.
And you make
you
even make the distinction between the priest isn't judging whether you're in a state of mortal sin because he doesn't know how you came to make the choice. All he's judging is you're in an objectively grave sin. The sin is visibly grave when daddy's with his new chickie-doo getting communion in front of the 17-year-old daughter while mom's beside herself trying to figure out how to manage after undergoing a no-fault divorce. He's not saying the husband's in mortal sin. He's just saying that is a visibly manifest grave sin. That was the word, manifest grave.
Right, and again, it comes down to this. So if this system were great, let's say we've got to get people back to communion. We've got to get people back to communion. If that system worked just on like a human level, if that system worked, where are all the parishioners? Why is mass attendance dropped off significantly? Why do people believe in the Eucharist? Why aren't people baptizing their babies? Why aren't people coming together? One of the things I mentioned in the book too is we've spent a lot of time here speaking about annulments, but there's another. So if you look at the chart of the chart in your head, 350 to 72,000 at its peak, right? Well, you put another. It's bad. So you draw another chart. Again, I'm an economist, so sorry. If you draw another chart, number of marriages in the late 60s is about 425,000. Marriages in 2020, under 100,000. So we're going to see a convergence I mean, if you simply follow the lines, I mean, would it be? I suppose it would be shocking to see more annulments than marriages 1 year, but if you just simply graph this out, would it be surprising to see it based on those numbers? I'm not making this up. These are, again, we talked about original thought. I'm just simply taking what the church has always taught. This isn't new. This isn't novel. This is anything but revolutionary. It's just basic teaching. I'm just looking at the math. I'm looking at the teachings and the math. There's really not much to argue about here. So you see, annulment's way up, marriage is way down. Why aren't people getting married? In other words, if the system that we've got is working just great, it's just working, it's terrific. Where are the parishioners? Where are the marriages? Where are the babies? Where are the confession lines? Where's the anointing of the sick during a pandemic? What's going on? And, my thesis in this book in large measure is we're not treating matrimony as a sacrament, but I think that, again, if I were to do a follow-up to this book, and again, I don't want to write this, but it would be, we're not treating any of the sacraments as sacraments. Because if we did, this is what it would look like. And by the way, I'm not saying this is universally true. There are great priests, there are great bishops, there are great laity, there are people that, love God. There are a lot of great Catholics out there. So I'm trying not to speak in universals. But the system is broken and we need to fix it. We have to fix it. If we lose marriage, we lose. End of sentence, end of paragraph. What do we have left?
What I tell people is because this is Christ's church, it will get fixed. We don't know how,
Amen.
We don't know when, and we're in no power to fix it other than,
right.
You're writing a book, you're doing research, you're trying to get people talking about it. But it has to get fixed because it's Christ's church and it will get fixed.
That's right. Then we have to be hopeful, and I'm glad you mentioned that. We have to be hopeful. And the other part, too, is I want to emphasize is that couples have to work together. I mean, that's so important. It's at the end of the day, even if every diocese went with every recommendation that I've outlined, I don't think they will. But let's say the church, they were like, boy, John's really onto something here. Let's do all. It's still going to be up to the couple. Pray for your spouse. Develop a devotion to Mary. You have, especially for men today, you have to. That's not, you have to. There are things we have to do. We have to rely on grace. These are things we have to do. I mean, it's going to be up to the couple. You have to pray for your spouse. This is a very important thing. We have to do this. So there are things we can do too. I don't want to present this book in such a way that, oh, here's where people have messed up. But yes, but at the same time, we Catholic husbands and wives have to take upon ourselves to try to help our own marriages. So because there may not be a lot of help on the way very soon. So we have to do what we can to help. And by the way, to nourish each other, to support each other in their marriages. By the way, I probably the nicest thing I've ever heard anybody tell me is that my marriage inspired theirs. That's probably the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. I've gotten that a few times in the last few years, and I always think, wow, that's too noble. I'm not deserving of that, but it's very sweet of them to say it, right? But we can do that to some measure. Good marriages inspire other marriages to be good, right? And so that's something we can do. We can change things.
And something Cardinal Burke says is even the people who are in difficult marriages, like really difficult, like on the receiving end of a no-fault divorce, them being faithful to, he talks about those people being faithful to marriage is also an example to marriage and to their children.
Exactly.
And
yes.
He says a lot of priests come out of those families where there's one party who was on the receiving end of a divorce that they were reluctantly had to accept, and then that party remained faithful to marriage. Cardinal Burke said that priests come out of those families sometimes.
Amen to that. Absolutely, 100%. I think John Paul II has made similar comments too. And so one of the things I have in the book is I have a lot of, as you know, is that I have a lot of the statements by Pope St. John Paul II, who, by the way, in some measure was saying the things we're talking about here. I mean, these are just thematically the same things Pope John Paul II actually has already said to the Rota. We're just talking about them, right? We're having a conversation that he started, right? We're just talking about it now.
Right. So. After the 1983 code came out, he was publicly talking to the Rota about these loose cannon psychological annulments.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
John, we've been going here for about an hour. So I think you've ended it well, encouraging those who are in marriages. And I had to throw my little statement in those who are in difficult marriages.
Mm-hmm.
So back to how we got started on this. You wrote this book, Betrayed Without a Kiss. And I got an advanced copy because you knew me. You even had me list in the acknowledgments. Thanks, because a lot of my research is about the annulment data, and the pre-orders are possible right now, both through the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon's taking pre-orders. EWTN's taking pre-orders.
Yeah, that's very nice. I mean, then tanbooks.com. Yeah. So, thanks for your help. I want to thank you for a lot of the research I have. Yeah, you were really helpful. Your site, very helpful for that too. And it was good. It was an honor to write the book. And I'm hoping that, married couples can read this and gain some inspiration for the marriages. And I'm hoping the clergy reads this too, because I don't think they've learned as much in the seminary. I think there needs to be a good take. Maybe a new look at things and the importance of all the sacraments. And hopefully the clergy, priest, and the bishops, God willing, can take a look at this and think, maybe we should change some things. Maybe we can nourish marriages more than we have in the past. So that's my hope.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.